Princess Zephyra stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Times Eternal Dominion *, watching the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. Her purple skin gleamed under the ship's lights, and her silver eyes showed the same boredom she felt during every conquest. This would be her 24th world to claim for the Valdorian Empire. The planet looked ordinary. Blue oceans, green and brown land masses, white clouds swirling in patterns. The beings living there called it Earth. According to their intelligence reports, the creatures called themselves humans, and they seemed remarkably unremarkable. "Your Highness," said Commander Vex, her chief military advisor, "we have completed our scans of the human civilization. They are even more primitive than our initial reports suggested." Zephyra nodded without much interest. She had heard similar reports about dozens of species. The Valdorians had been conquering worlds for over 3,000 years. They had a system that worked perfectly every time. "Tell me about their technology," she said, more out of duty than curiosity. Vex activated a holographic display that showed human ships and weapons. They use crude fusion drives for space travel. Their fastest ships take months to travel between planets in their own system. They have kinetic weapons that fire metal projectiles, and some basic energy weapons that are laughably weak compared to our plasma cannons. The princess examined the data with practiced eyes. Human ships looked bulky and inefficient. Their space stations were simple metal structures held together with basic materials. Their largest warship was smaller than a Valdorian patrol vessel. "What about their military strength?" she asked. "Approximately 2 million active military personnel across their entire planet," Vex replied. "They are divided into separate nations that sometimes fight each other. Their coordination is poor, and their command structure is fragmented." Zephyra almost smiled. Most species had at least unified their planet before achieving spaceflight. These humans were still arguing among themselves while trying to explore the stars. It would make conquest even easier than usual. "Any special abilities? Psychic powers? Enhanced physical capabilities? Unusual intelligence?" she asked. "None detected, Your Highness. They appear to be baseline biological entities with no remarkable traits. Average lifespan of about 80 years, which is quite short. Physical strength, approximately 1/3 of a Valdorian. No evidence of telepathic or psychokinetic abilities." The princess turned away from the display. She had conquered species far more advanced than these humans. The Zelthar had possessed powerful shields and beam weapons. The Korthaks were natural telepaths who could coordinate their forces perfectly. The Bruthan were massive creatures with incredible strength and natural armor. All of them had surrendered within days when faced with Valdorian might. "How many ships do they have in space?" she asked. 47 vessels total," Vex said. "Most are exploration ships or cargo transports. Only 12 could be considered warships, and those are centuries behind our technology." Zephyra looked at her own fleet through the bridge windows. 200 Valdorian warships floated in formation around her flagship. Each one could destroy an entire human city with a single shot. The Times Eternal Dominion Times alone was larger than the humans' entire space fleet combined. "Their planetary defenses?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be disappointing. "Basic missile systems and orbital platforms," Vex reported. "Nothing that could penetrate our shields or damage our hulls. We estimate we could neutralize their entire defensive network within 6 hours." The princess felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and disappointment that came with easy victories. Part of her wished these humans would provide at least some challenge, some reason to feel proud of her conquest. But that was a foolish thought. The Empire needed resources, not entertainment. Earth contained several rare minerals that were valuable for Valdorian technology. The planet's location would also provide a useful staging point for future expansion into this region of the galaxy. The humans themselves could serve as workers once they accepted Valdorian rule. "Have they detected our fleet?" Zephyra asked. "Yes, Your Highness. Their primitive sensors picked us up when we entered their solar system. They have been broadcasting radio signals toward us, but we have not responded yet." "What do their messages say?" Vex consulted his datapad. "Mostly attempts at communication. They are asking who we are, where we come from, what we want. Standard first contact protocols. Some of their leaders are calling for military preparation, but others are expressing excitement about meeting an alien species. Zephyra found that interesting despite herself. Most species reacted to the arrival of superior aliens with fear or aggressive posturing. The humans seemed to be experiencing a range of emotions, including something that could be called enthusiasm. Have they made any demands or threats? She asked. A few of their military leaders have warned us to stay away from their planet, Vex replied. But these seem to be minority voices. Most of their communications express curiosity and hope for peaceful contact. The princess considered this information. In her experience, species that remained optimistic when faced with overwhelming force were usually the ones that surrendered most quickly. They convinced themselves that cooperation would save them from destruction. Your Highness, said another officer, we are now within communication range for real-time dialogue. Shall we transmit the standard ultimatum? Zephyra nodded. The standard ultimatum was a carefully crafted message that had been refined over thousands of conquests. It demonstrated Valdorian power while offering the conquered species a chance to surrender with dignity. Most species accepted immediately once they understood the hopelessness of resistance. Begin transmission, she ordered. The communication officer activated the message array. Across space, radio waves carried the Valdorian ultimatum toward Earth. In several hours, depending on the distance, the humans would receive their first and final warning. Zephyra settled into her command chair to wait for the response. She expected the humans to ask for time to consider, perhaps attempt some desperate negotiations, and finally submit to imperial rule. Within a week, Earth would be another jewel in the Valdorian crown. She never imagined that the response would change everything she thought she knew about conquest, about her empire, and about what made a species truly dangerous in the galaxy. The human response arrived 8 hours later, and Princess Zephyra knew immediately that something was wrong. Her communication officer stared at his screen with obvious confusion, checking the data 3 times before speaking. Your Highness, he said slowly, we have received a reply from the human leadership. Zephyra straightened in her chair. Usually, responses came much faster when species were properly terrified. The delay suggested either panic or careful consideration. Neither was unusual, but the officer's expression indicated something unexpected. Play the message, she ordered. The main screen activated, showing a human female in a dark blue uniform with small metal decorations on her chest. The human had short gray hair and calm eyes that seemed genuinely friendly. When she spoke, her voice was steady and warm. Greetings, representatives of the Valdorian Empire. I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Coalition. We have received your message and appreciate you taking the time to communicate with us. We understand that your civilization possesses advanced technology and significant military capabilities. Zephyra frowned. This was not how conquered species usually began their surrender negotiations. The human admiral continued speaking. We acknowledge that your fleet could probably defeat our forces in direct combat. Your ships are clearly more advanced than ours, and you outnumber us significantly. However, we must respectfully decline your offer of vassalage. Commander Vex made a choking sound. In 3,000 years of Valdorian expansion, no species had ever declined their offer. They either surrendered immediately or fought desperately before being crushed. Nobody simply said no and then continued talking politely. We understand this might be surprising, Admiral Chen said, as if she could see their reaction across space. Most species you encounter probably respond with either immediate submission or aggressive resistance. We would like to propose a third option. The princess leaned forward in her seat. A third option? What could these primitive humans possibly offer that would interest the Valdorian Empire? We propose a series of competitions, the Admiral explained. Not military battles, but contests of skill, creativity, and problem-solving. We believe that the right to remain free should be earned through demonstration of worth, not simply given or taken through force. Zephyra looked around her bridge. Her officers stared at the screen with expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Several tactical computers were running analysis programs, trying to determine the strategic purpose behind the human proposal. Admiral Chen smiled slightly. We understand you have conquered many worlds and met many species. We suspect that most of them were either too weak to resist or too rigid to adapt. We believe humans might offer something different. The message continued with specific details. The humans proposed 5 different contests, each designed to test different capabilities: engineering challenges, resource management problems, strategic puzzles, and creative tasks. They suggested neutral judges from both sides and fair conditions for all participants. If we win these contests, Admiral Chen said, we ask that you recognize Earth as a free world and perhaps consider us for alliance rather than conquest. If you win, we will accept Valdorian rule, but we ask to be treated as partners rather than slaves. The message ended with the human admiral expressing hope for interesting competitions and mutual learning. She seemed genuinely excited about the prospect of testing human abilities against alien challenges. Silence filled the bridge for several minutes after the transmission ended. Princess Zephyra had never encountered anything like this in her military training or historical studies. Her tactical AI systems showed error messages, unable to process the strategic logic behind the human proposal. Your Highness, Commander Vex said carefully, this appears to be some form of delaying tactic. Perhaps they hope to buy time while preparing their defenses or calling for assistance from unknown allies. Zephyra considered this explanation, but something felt wrong about it. The humans had been broadcasting their communications openly. With no attempt at secrecy, their military preparations were minimal and clearly inadequate against Valdorian forces. If this was a delaying tactic, it was the most ineffective one she had ever seen. What do our intelligence reports say about human psychology? She asked. Her chief analyst consulted his data. Limited information, Your Highness. They appear to be a social species with complex emotional responses. They seem to value concepts like fairness, challenge, and proving themselves. Some human cultures have traditions of settling disputes through contests, rather than warfare. But no species has ever proposed such a thing to the Valdorian Empire, Vex pointed out. There must be some hidden purpose. The princess stood and walked to the main screen, studying the frozen image of Admiral Chen's face. The human looked confident, but not arrogant. Determined, but not desperate. Most importantly, she looked genuinely interested in the outcome of these proposed competitions. Run tactical simulations, Zephyra ordered. Assume the humans are sincere about these contests. What are the possible advantages they might gain? Her officers worked quickly, feeding data into their computers. The results were puzzling. If the humans actually intended to abide by the results of fair competitions, they would gain no military advantage. Their forces would remain inferior, their position unchanged except for whatever pride they might feel in performing well. The simulations show no significant strategic benefit for the humans, reported the tactical officer. Even if they won some contests, they would still be essentially defenseless against our fleet. Zephyra found herself genuinely curious for the first time in years. Every other species she had encountered was predictable. They followed logical patterns based on fear, pride, or desperation. These humans seemed to be operating from entirely different motivations. What do they actually want? She asked, speaking more to herself than to her officers. Perhaps they want to die with dignity, suggested one officer. Or they hope to impress us enough that we will treat them well as subjects, said another. But neither explanation felt right to the princess. Something in Admiral Chen's manner suggested a different motivation entirely. The human had seemed almost eager about the prospect of competition, as if she viewed the arrival of a superior alien force as an opportunity rather than a disaster. Your Highness, the communication officer said, they are requesting a response within 24 hours. Admiral Chen says they understand we might need time to consider such an unusual proposal. Zephyra returned to her command chair, her mind working through possibilities she had never needed to consider before. The logical choice was to ignore the human proposal and proceed with standard conquest procedures. The humans could not resist, and their strange offer changed nothing about the military situation. but something about their response had caught her off guard. In all her years of conquest, she had never met a species that responded to overwhelming force with genuine curiosity and a desire to prove themselves. She found herself wondering what these contests might reveal about human capabilities. Against all her training and experience, Princess Zephyra found herself considering the impossible, accepting a challenge from a primitive species that should have been trembling in fear. Princess Zephyra announced her decision 12 hours later, against the loud protests of her senior officers. She would accept the human challenge, partly from curiosity and partly from overconfidence. How much trouble could a primitive species cause in a few simple contests? The first competition took place in neutral space between Earth and the Valdorian fleet. Both sides contributed materials and equipment for an engineering challenge, building the most efficient power generator using only basic components. This should be over quickly, Commander Vex muttered as they watched the preparation through their screens. Our engineers have centuries of advanced training. These humans barely understand fusion technology. The Valdorian team worked with practiced precision. They assembled their generator using proven designs and advanced techniques. Their creation was elegant, powerful, and exactly what any qualified engineer would build, given the available materials. The human team worked differently. They argued constantly, changing their design 3 times during the construction period. Several team members worked on completely different approaches simultaneously. Their workspace looked chaotic, with components scattered everywhere and half-finished experiments abandoned in corners. They appear to lack basic organization, observed the chief engineer. No species could develop space technology with such undisciplined methods. But Princess Zephyra found herself watching the human team with growing interest. Despite their apparent chaos, something purposeful was happening. Different groups would suddenly combine their separate projects, sharing discoveries and building on each other's work in ways that seemed random but somehow effective. When time ran out, both teams presented their generators for testing. The Valdorian device performed exactly as expected, producing steady power with excellent efficiency ratings. The judges, half Valdorian, half human, noted its superior construction and reliable output. Then they tested the human generator. It looked strange, built from components that seemed barely connected. Several Valdorian judges predicted immediate failure. The device worked perfectly. More than perfectly, it produced nearly as much power as the Valdorian generator while using 30% fewer materials. Somehow, the humans had found ways to make their components serve multiple functions, creating efficiency gains that Valdorian engineering principles suggested were impossible. How? Vex demanded, studying the scan results. Their design violates basic engineering optimization theories. The human engineer, a cheerful woman named Dr. Martinez, explained their approach during the post-competition review. We figured that since we couldn't match your technical knowledge, we should try doing things you might not think of. So we looked for ways to break the usual rules. But the principles of energy conversion are universal, protested the Valdorian chief engineer. There are optimal solutions for any given set of parameters. Sure, Dr. Martinez agreed. But the parameters we had weren't quite the same as the ones in your textbooks, were they? We had to work with what was available, not what would be ideal. So we got creative. The second competition was a resource management challenge. Both teams received identical supplies and were asked to sustain a small population for as long as possible. This should have been an easy Valdorian victory, given their centuries of experience managing space colonies. The Valdorian team applied standard protocols, creating efficient systems that used resources at the minimum sustainable rate. Their approach was methodical and proven, based on mathematical models that had worked on hundreds of worlds. The human team did something unexpected again. Instead of focusing on conservation, they found ways to regenerate and recycle resources that the Valdorians hadn't considered. They turned waste products into useful materials, created closed-loop systems that generated more output than input, and somehow made their supplies last 40% longer than the Valdorian effort. They're cheating, Vex declared. They must have hidden additional resources or modified the test parameters. But careful examination showed no rule violations. The humans had simply approached the problem from a completely different direction, finding possibilities that weren't included in standard Valdorian resource management theory. "Where did you learn these techniques?" Princess Zephyra asked Dr. Martinez during the review session. "Back home," the human replied. "Earth isn't always cooperative about providing what we need, so we got good at making do with whatever we could find. Also, we learned a lot from biology. Living systems are amazing at turning limitations into advantages." The third competition was strategic planning. Both teams had to devise solutions for a complex scenario involving multiple competing objectives and limited information. This was supposed to be the easiest Valdorian victory, given their military's vast experience with tactical problems. The Valdorian team created a detailed, logical plan that addressed each objective in order of priority. Their solution was comprehensive, efficient, and exactly what military academies throughout the Empire would have recommended. The human team spent most of their time arguing about completely different approaches. They rejected several promising strategies, chose seemingly inferior options, and built in what appeared to be unnecessary redundancies and backup plans. When they tested both strategies using computer simulations, the results surprised everyone. The Valdorian plan worked well under normal conditions, but failed catastrophically when unexpected complications arose. The human plan looked messy and inefficient, but adapted successfully to every problem the simulation could generate. "You planned for failures that weren't even specified in the scenario parameters," the Valdorian strategic advisor observed. Admiral Chen smiled. "We planned for things to go wrong in ways we couldn't predict. That's usually what happens when humans make plans. Reality has its own ideas about how things should work. But that's inefficient," Vex protested. "You sacrificed optimal performance to prepare for improbable scenarios." "Maybe," Admiral Chen agreed. "But improbable things seem to happen a lot when humans are involved. We've learned to expect the unexpected." After 3 competitions, the score was tied. Each side had won one clear victory, and the third had been declared a draw due to the different but equally valid approaches both teams had taken. Princess Zephyra found herself more confused than ever. The humans weren't winning through superior technology or greater intelligence. Instead, they seemed to excel at finding solutions that nobody else would have considered. They broke rules that weren't actually rules, ignored optimal strategies in favor of adaptable ones, and somehow turned their weaknesses into advantages. "Your Highness," Commander Vex said privately after the third competition, "I'm beginning to think these humans might be more dangerous than we initially calculated." "Dangerous how?" Zephyra asked. "They're still primitive, still outnumbered, still outgunned." "Yes," Vex replied slowly. "But they're also completely unpredictable. Every time we think we understand their limitations, they find ways around them. If we actually conquered them, how could we control a species that refuses to accept that anything is impossible?" Princess Zephyra stared out at the distant blue planet where 8 billion humans waited to learn their fate. For the first time in her career, she was beginning to wonder if conquest might not be the simple matter she had always assumed it to be. The fourth competition changed everything. Princess Zephyra had designed it herself, choosing a scenario that should have been impossible for humans to win. A pure creativity challenge that required participants to solve problems using only imagination and basic materials. "Creativity is not a measurable skill," Commander Vex had argued when she announced the contest. "How can we judge something so subjective? We will know success when we see it," Zephyra replied, though she wasn't entirely sure what she expected to discover. Both teams were given identical boxes containing simple items: metal scraps, basic tools, electronic components, and various raw materials. Their task was to create something that would be useful, beautiful, and surprising. They had 6 hours. The Valdorian team approached the challenge systematically. They discussed possible projects, selected the most practical option, and built a sophisticated communication device that could amplify signals across vast distances. It was sleek, functional, and demonstrated advanced understanding of physics principles. The human team did something nobody anticipated. They built a musical instrument. It wasn't just any instrument. Using the metal scraps, they created a complex arrangement of resonating chambers that could produce dozens of different sounds. The electronic components became sound processors that could layer and modify the music in real time. The basic tools were incorporated into the design, allowing the instrument to be played in multiple ways simultaneously. But that wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part came when they demonstrated their creation. Dr. Martinez and Admiral Chen began playing music together, creating sounds that none of the Valdorians had ever heard before. Other humans joined in, some playing the instrument, others singing, others creating rhythm by tapping on available surfaces. Within minutes, they had turned the sterile competition chamber into something that felt alive with sound and energy. "What is the practical purpose of this device?" asked the lead Valdorian judge. "Music," Admiral Chen replied simply. "But what does it accomplish? What problem does it solve?" The human admiral considered this question carefully. "It makes people feel connected to each other. It creates beauty where none existed before. It turns individual humans into something larger than themselves." The Valdorian judges struggled to assign a score. The human creation was undeniably beautiful, and certainly surprising. But its usefulness was difficult to quantify. How could they measure the value of something that existed purely to create emotional responses? Princess Zephyra found herself listening to the human music long after the competition ended. The sounds were strange but somehow compelling, creating feelings she didn't have words for. More importantly, she began to understand something about humans that her intelligence reports had completely missed. "They don't just solve problems," she told Vex later. "They create new kinds of problems to solve. They make challenges for themselves even when none exist." This realization led her to review all the competition data with new understanding. The humans hadn't simply found clever solutions to engineering and strategy problems. They had approached each challenge as if it were an exciting opportunity rather than a burden to overcome. "Commander," she said, "run a new simulation. Assume we conquer Earth successfully. Model the long-term occupation requirements." Vex activated the tactical computers and fed in updated data about human psychology and behavior patterns. The results made him frown deeply. "Your Highness, the projections are concerning. Standard occupation protocols assume a defeated population will accept new leadership once their military is destroyed, but these humans seem unlikely to follow that pattern." The simulations showed alarming possibilities. Humans might scatter across the galaxy before complete conquest was achieved. Their tendency to find unexpected solutions suggested they would quickly learn to turn any Valdorian technology into weapons or tools for resistance. Most disturbing was their apparent inability to accept permanent defeat. According to these models, Vex continued, conquering humanity might destabilize the entire empire. They would likely inspire rebellion among other conquered species, by demonstrating that Valdorian rule is not inevitable. Princess Zephyra studied the data with growing unease. Every previous conquest had strengthened the empire by adding resources and population. But humanity represented something different, a force that could potentially undo 3,000 years of careful expansion. "There's something else," Vex added reluctantly. "Our xenopsychologists have identified what they believe is the core difference between humans and other species we've encountered." "Explain." "Most intelligent species evolve on worlds that allow them to become dominant through specialization. Powerful predators, advanced tool users, psychic abilities, or other advantages that let them control their environment. These species succeed by perfecting their strengths." The commander activated a holographic display showing Earth's environmental history. Humans evolved on a world that refused to be controlled. Volcanic eruptions, ice ages, asteroid impacts, massive climate shifts. Their planet tried to kill them repeatedly, in different ways, for millions of years. Zephyra stared at the data. The environmental challenges humans had survived would have wiped out most species completely. Yet somehow, they had not only survived but thrived. "They didn't evolve to dominate their environment," Vex explained. "They evolved to adapt to environments that couldn't be dominated. They became the most flexible species in the galaxy by necessity. And now they see the arrival of a superior alien force not as a disaster, but as the most interesting challenge they've encountered in centuries. Their entire species has been unconsciously preparing for this moment for millions of years. The princess felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood. Genuine uncertainty about the outcome of a military situation. Every other species had been predictable because they followed logical patterns based on survival instincts. Humans seem to operate on entirely different principles. What do they actually want from these competitions? She asked. Based on behavioral analysis, Vex replied. They appear to want to prove that they're worth keeping around, not as subjects or slaves, but as something more interesting. More interesting how? As equals, Your Highness. They want us to see them as partners rather than conquests. Princess Zephyra walked to the bridge windows and looked out at the human planet. 8 billion beings lived down there, each one capable of the same adaptability and creativity she had witnessed in the competitions. For the first time in her military career, she realized she might be facing an opponent she couldn't defeat through conventional means. The humans weren't stronger than the Valdorians. They weren't smarter or more advanced. But they possessed something her empire had never encountered. The ability to treat any situation, no matter how hopeless, as a puzzle to be solved rather than a fate to be accepted. And that, Princess Zephyra realized, made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The fifth and final competition was scheduled to be a direct debate between Princess Zephyra and Admiral Chen. Each would present arguments for why their species deserved to determine Earth's future. It should have been an easy victory for the princess, given her centuries of education and diplomatic experience. But as she prepared her presentation, Zephyra found herself questioning everything she had planned to say. How could she argue for conquest when she was no longer certain it was the right choice? The debate took place in a neutral chamber with representatives from both species watching. Princess Zephyra spoke first, presenting the traditional Valdorian position with practiced eloquence. She explained how the Empire brought order to chaos, peace to warring worlds, and prosperity to primitive civilizations. She described the benefits of advanced technology, unified government, and protection under Valdorian law. Her arguments were logical, well-reasoned, and completely convincing by imperial standards. Every previous species had recognized the wisdom of joining the Empire once these benefits were explained to them. Admiral Chen listened respectfully, then stood to present the human position. But instead of arguing against Valdorian conquest, she did something unexpected. Princess Zephyra makes excellent points, the Admiral began. The Valdorian Empire has clearly brought stability and advancement to many worlds. Your civilization has achievements that humans can only dream of reaching. We don't question your superiority in technology, military power, or administrative efficiency. The princess frowned. This didn't sound like a counter-argument. However, Admiral Chen continued, we believe there's something valuable that conquest would destroy. Something that might benefit the Valdorian Empire if it were preserved rather than absorbed. And what is that? Zephyra asked. Diversity of thought, the Admiral replied. For 3,000 years, your empire has been adding similar species to its population. Advanced civilizations that developed predictable solutions to universal problems. You've created the most successful galactic civilization in known history by perfecting proven methods. Chen activated a display showing human historical data. Humans represent something different. We're not more advanced than you, but we're more chaotic. We solve problems in ways nobody expects, including ourselves. We take risks that logical beings would never consider. We fail more often than we succeed, but our failures teach us things that success never could. Chaos is inefficient, Commander Vex interjected. Order creates prosperity. Usually, yes, Admiral Chen agreed. But sometimes chaos creates innovations that order never discovers. Sometimes the illogical solution turns out to be the breakthrough that changes everything. Princess Zephyra found herself genuinely interested in this argument. What do you propose? Partnership instead of conquest, Chen said. Let humans remain independent, but create formal alliance between our species. Your empire gets access to human adaptability and problem-solving capabilities. We get access to your technology and protection. Both sides benefit without anyone losing their identity. Impossible, Vex declared. The Empire does not negotiate with primitive species. Actually, Zephyra said slowly. The Empire has never encountered a species like this before. Perhaps our usual policies aren't appropriate in this situation. The debate continued for several more hours. But Princess Zephyra's mind was already working through the implications of Chen's proposal. An alliance would be unprecedented, but it might also be necessary. The more she learned about humans, the more convinced she became that attempting to control them would ultimately destroy both species. When the debate ended, the judges declared the results inconclusive. Both presentations had been compelling, but they addressed completely different questions. The princess had argued for the benefits of joining the Empire, while Admiral Chen had argued for the benefits of remaining separate but allied. We need time to consider these results, Zephyra announced. The competitions have raised questions that require careful analysis. Back on her flagship, Princess Zephyra faced the most difficult decision of her life. Her senior officers unanimously recommended proceeding with conquest, arguing that the competitions had been an interesting diversion, but changed nothing about the military situation. Your Highness, Vex said urgently, if we don't conquer Earth now, other primitive species will learn of our hesitation. The entire Empire could face rebellion. And if we do conquer Earth, Zephyra replied, we might trigger exactly the kind of galaxy-wide instability you're worried about. These humans won't quietly accept defeat. They'll spend the next 1,000 years finding creative ways to cause problems for us. She walked to her private quarters and sent a coded message to the Imperial Council, explaining her decision. She knew the response would be swift and probably involve her removal from command, but she also knew it was the right choice for the Empire's long-term survival. 3 hours later, Princess Zephyra broadcast her final message to Earth. Admiral Chen, people of Earth, she began. I have reviewed the results of our competitions and considered the arguments presented by both sides. The Valdorian Empire officially recognizes Earth as a sovereign world and offers formal alliance between our species. The response from her own fleet was immediate chaos. Half her commanders demanded clarification, while others began calculating the political implications for their own careers. Several ships moved into position to potentially override her decision by force. But Zephyra continued her broadcast, knowing she had only minutes before her officers might attempt to stop her. This alliance will be based on mutual benefit and respect. Humans will remain free to govern themselves while gaining access to Valdorian technology and protection. The Empire will gain access to human creativity and adaptability, which we believe will strengthen our civilization. Admiral Chen's response came quickly, filled with excitement and gratitude that was so genuine it made the princess smile, despite the chaos erupting around her. Furthermore, Zephyra added, I am establishing a new imperial policy. When the Empire encounters species that demonstrate unique capabilities, we will consider alliance, rather than conquest, as our primary option. The goal is not just to expand our territory, but to improve our civilization. The transmission ended just as Commander Vex and several other officers entered her quarters, their faces grim with purpose. Princess Zephyra had expected this moment and was prepared for it. Your Highness, Vex said formally, I am relieving you of command under Imperial Emergency Protocol 7. Your decision endangers the security of the Empire. I understand, Commander, she replied calmly. I accept responsibility for my actions, but as security officers moved to escort her away, alarms began sounding throughout the fleet. The tactical displays showed something impossible. Human ships were approaching the Valdorian fleet at high speed. What are they doing? Vex demanded. Are they attacking? Are they attacking? The communication officer looked up from his station with bewilderment. Sir, the humans are transmitting technical data, engineering specifications for improvements to our fusion drives, shield generators, and weapon systems. They're sharing their innovations with us. Princess Zephyra smiled as the security officers hesitated. Even in chains, she had been right about humanity. They didn't see the galaxy as a place to be conquered or ruled, but as an enormous puzzle to be solved together. And that perspective, she realized, was exactly what the Valdorian Empire needed to avoid stagnation and decline. The princess had been caught off guard by human unpredictability, but now she understood that being surprised was the most valuable thing that had happened to her empire in 3,000 years.